no one had a clear set plan ever. Truthfully, no one. And I've met some really interesting people and some big company CEOs and founders and board directors and the like, and politicians. No one had a clear set path. Yeah. They knew some things they were curious about. They looked for some signals. They looked within if they enjoyed it. And I think that line, like maybe you and I have talked about it, like luck equals preparation meets opportunity.
Welcome to Nonlinear, the podcast about the messy, winding path to doing meaningful work. Today's guest is Vidit Agarwal, CEO of the Curiosity Centre and host of the High Flyers podcast, which has done over 250 episodes with senior leaders in tech, business, sport, and beyond. We covered a lot of ground on this episode. We started with Vidit's formative days, growing up in Melbourne, loving tennis, and doing not so well at school, through to leading a successful career in the CPG industry at companies like Coles, Nestle, and P&G, all the way through to now, where he started his own business, the Curiosity Centre, and become a successful podcast host. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Hi Vidit, welcome to the show. How does it feel being on the other side of the mic?
It's strange. It's strange. I've not done a whole lot of this. I've done a couple of interviews where I've been the guest on my own show.
Sure.
But I've not done another podcast actually. So you're the first.
I'm excited to be one of the first and hear more about your story instead of, hearing you ask questions. That'll be interesting to get into.
Yeah.
I want to start today by asking, you do a lot of things. You're a podcast host, you're a CEO, you're an investor. How do you answer simply when someone says, what do you do for work?
This is really hard.
Yeah.
And we were joking about this before. When I meet someone for the first time, I go a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I often joke about this with my partner. She'll say, why do you say a lot of things? Why don't you just say one thing?
Yeah.
I say I'm the founder and CEO of Curiosity Centre, and as we'll chat in this conversation, the rest of it fits within that.
Yeah.
But a curious mind, I think that's what I'd say if it's like very, very generic.
Yeah.
But also I've realized that's one benefit of doing the podcast, and I think you learn this as you do it, because it's a public medium.
Sure.
You build this parasocial relationship with people where they kind of know more about you than you think they do.
Yeah.
Because you're putting yourself out there so much. Like I've had times where I'll say something on my own show and someone will come up to me and say, hey, you talked about that. How did that go? And I get terrified. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize I mentioned I did such and such thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally it's a bunch of different things, and then Curiosity Centre. But I'd say most people know the podcast, and the rest of the stuff by design is a bit private or a bit behind the scenes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And keen to get into more of the story of the podcast and the business a bit later down the track. But I'd love to start today by asking you a bit about your formative years. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and where you grew up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Melbourne, very Indian heritage, similar to you, same as you. I had a very happy childhood, very happy childhood, very closely connected to my family.
Sure.
Still am, like speak to mum and dad frequently. I've got a younger brother. Was big into sport growing up. I've talked about this quite a bit. The dream was to play tennis professionally.
I listened to your interview with Craig Tiley.
Craig Tiley. That was a dream guest, right? Selfishly. Maybe it was delusion where I trained a lot and I had all the support. Like I remember every year on my birthday, I'd get a new tennis racket. Yeah. And even when we'd go on holidays, we'd go to the sports shop in that city or country and I'd get a new tennis racket. So tennis was I always said it was my first friend in many ways. Yeah. But then I probably didn't have the focus and determination to perhaps pursue it more seriously. And then a lot of variety. Like mum made both me and my brother do a lot of things as kids. So we do pottery, we do karate, we do calligraphy, we do drawing, we do tennis, cricket. Like it was actually a really funny one is a lot of my friends played video games growing up. I never played video games. So when I'd go to their houses and they'd talk about these games, I'd go, cool, can you teach me how to play it? Yeah. For whatever reason, I was always a very outdoor kid. Riding the bike was a big one. In my neighborhood, riding the bike was something I loved doing. And
the TikTok age.
Yeah, loved it. So that was childhood, and mum was always around. I think we were fortunate, and I think I only appreciate that now as I get older. Mum was a stay-at-home mum by choice.
Sure.
a chief family officer.
Never heard that one.
Yeah,
That's good.
and she was always around, and that played a huge role in
Mm.
our upbringing that only now I appreciate.
Mm. And you see, sounds like your parents were a huge influence growing up. Were there any other sort of mentor figures or influences, say at school, that really shaped who you became today?
Not really. Like, I've never, it's good or a bad thing. I've never really tried to model myself on anyone else, and like I think now I'm comfortable in my own skin. But I think when you're a kid growing up, you try and emulate probably sports, like sports players. Again, tennis. Like I used to watch it as a like a all the time. So whether it was a Federer, Nadal. I think Nadal was someone never met him, but I connected with his approach of just having a go and perseverance and that grinder.
Sure.
I feel like that's what my life has been like. Just when I put in the effort, you compare with someone like a Federer, comes across as things sort of come naturally to him a bit. That was one. I think mum and dad were huge influences, right? And again, I only appreciate that as I get older. Is like dad taught me about the importance of relationships, like actual relationships, not networking. I think there's a delta between the two. And mum taught me about dreaming big, as we'll chat about with the work I do now. A lot of that was mum's support and influence in a behind the scenes manner, like just a phone call or a chat, and her going, "Hey, you know what? Give it a go. You can make it work."
And how did they model those things? So you mentioned the power of relationships and the importance of dreaming big. Was it they would do the things themselves and you would kind of learn that through osmosis, or was it you would have very explicit conversations with them about, go for your dreams, or it's important to make friends and connect with other people? Was it a more explicit type of relationship?
I think a bit of both. I mean, parents tell us things as kids, and we go, "Dad, what are you talking about?" Like, yeah, sure. But I think one thing that stuck with me with Dad is when I was probably graduating from university, he made me open a LinkedIn account when LinkedIn was just starting out, right? I can't even remember the time frame when LinkedIn launched. And he always said, build relationships and get to know people and be curious. And I think because he's done that in his own life, right? And he's always built relationships, and even now he does it really well. And I'd say I've probably learned that from him through osmosis and through him encouraging me. But he never, like, they were never hard-handed parents. They never forced me to do anything, both me and my brother. And then mum's always been a believer and someone who's like optimist and believes in the good and believes in if you try, it might work out. I was not the smartest kid. Truthfully, I was not the smartest kid. And I think it was a combination of a lack of focus and like I probably am not the person who fits into a theory only environment. Like I'm someone as I get older, I've realized I'm a practical person. That's why at university I did a lot of practical subjects and did like internships and things. So I think that was really important. But even that, if I share a story, so when I graduated high school with a very average ATAR, like very average. Like I'm not being humble here, like truly very average, to the point where I didn't get into the first preferred. I didn't get into a bachelor's course of any kind. So I had to do a diploma as a pathway and then go. So kudos to my careers counselor at my school, Jackie, who was, again, another believer at that point. And I still remember we sat down in the room, my mum, myself and her, and she said, Vidit, you don't have many options, but we can find a kind of third door in a way, which is a pathway course. And I literally did a 12-month diploma in Melbourne at RMIT University, and then got the grades in that. And then I think the policy was if I do well on that and get the grades and the teachers give me good recommendations, I can get into the second year of a bachelor's course and use the credits from that diploma. So that was, I think, a really pivotal one where...
And how were you feeling at that time? Because I know, growing up in an Indian household, often the marks and the education feels like a be-all or end-all. At least that was in my experience. Like there's a lot of, not necessarily explicit pressure, but just societal expectation almost on education being the thing. Was that a challenge to navigate with your family? Was it, or were they kind of, supportive throughout? Love to hear about that side of things.
they never made me feel inferior for the result. I think they were disappointed for sure.
Yeah.
But again, back to Mum's point, I think it was proven in her actions. She went, okay, this is the marks you've got. Let's work out a plan.
That's awesome.
I think Dad probably was a little bit disappointed and probably maybe kept his feelings to himself and didn't express it. But again, dad was an entrepreneur all his life. He started out and built his own business and scaled it, and that's how they moved to Australia to expand his own business in agriculture. So I think he also saw that the education system is not the be all and end all of life.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably been my learning
Nice.
through life is, and I have this chat with a lot of younger people now, where they say, what do I do with my career, or where do I start out? But as I've learned and maybe as you've learned and others have learned, after a while that actually doesn't become a crutch anymore. Like no one's asked me, how did I do in school?
No,
that hasn't come up in the last 10 years or even longer, right? But no, they never like sat me down and said, hey son, you've disappointed us, or you've that was never a case. But I think there was definitely it was a low moment for sure, and I can still visualize the day where the results came out and we logged in onto the portal in the morning, and you kind of have that feeling where you just heart sinks and you're like, oh, life, what do I do now? But I'm really grateful for that happening, I think, in some ways, and there's been a few more crucible moments that we can chat about, but that was definitely one.
No, it's nice to hear that they were supportive and continued pushing you on this path that you ended up. What did you end up studying when you were at university, and what kind of internship experiences did you have while you were there?
So I studied the diploma, which was a diploma in business. I can't even remember the exact name. And then I did a Bachelor of International Business, which is essentially a Bachelor of Commerce with the international business element to it. And that was for a couple of reasons. It's a generalist program. Business was because of Dad and a lot of the cousins and family have always been in business. And then international, I mentioned earlier about being practical. So I actually studied that at RMIT, and RMIT, at least at that point, had a really good, I think it's called WAL, Work Integrated Learning, where you'd actually do a couple of subjects and you'd work with actual companies. You'd work with actual companies and meet the execs and present case studies and do actual work, kind of like a de facto consultant as a student. And that was great. I really enjoyed that. And then actually what was really interesting, a crucial moment there, which again, credit to Mum and probably my unconventional way of approaching life, I came across a job at RMIT to manage one of their student mentoring programs. It was a 12-month job in my third year. I think it was a 4-year degree, given I did the first year differently. And I remember talking to my mum and saying, hey, if I do this, I need to defer my study for 12 months. This could be a risk, because if I do this and I might like it and never come back to my studies, or I might not like it, and then what happens next? And I just went, you know what, let's apply for it. And if I get it, I can defer my studies. So I deferred my studies for 6 months. I didn't do the 12 months because I said, let's try it.
Let's try it first.
And quickly realized I didn't like it. I wanted to be in a more commercial environment. And then, so that 6 months took me into my final year of study. And as you know, you see a lot of vacation programs and a lot of summer internships, generally for a month or 6 weeks to 8 weeks. I felt that was good. And I guess also I applied for them and I got rejected by a bunch of them. And then I came across this Coles internship. I never thought of working for a supermarket chain. But then when you actually dig into the company, it's a huge company, one of the biggest in Australia. I mean, a big company globally as well. They do north of $30 billion in revenue, I think. I believe I might have the numbers slightly off. And so I saw an internship there where I could work 2 days a week and still study full time. And so applied for that and got that role. And that's where my, I guess, corporate career started in some ways.
Amazing. And did that internship just roll straight into a grad program, or what did that process look like from going from, part-time intern to, I believe you spent 3 years at Coles in the end? Yeah,
so 3 years. So maybe worth giving context on the environment at Coles, because that answers your question by the pathway. Coles had a great environment of accountability and ownership as an intern and as a grad, and a culture of speak up and in meetings express your opinion about why something's working or why not in a collaborative manner, and a very commercial environment, given FMCG and retail is extremely commercial, right? So I got the internship and started that for the first, there was a 12-month internship, and then probably 8 months into that, I had to start considering the next step. Do I apply for a grad program in Coles, or do I look outside? And I wanted to stay at Coles. Applied for the grad program, didn't get it the first time. The feedback was, you're a good guy, but you haven't really expressed yourself in meetings. You the work you've done, because you're an intern, you've done less work. We're not quite sure if you have the potential to belong in this environment and thrive in this environment, which is really crushing.
Yeah,
as
hard
a
to hear,
first
I imagine,
job. And this is building on, I talked earlier about my school experience, right? Finishing that. So the story I would tell myself is, I'm a failure. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm the loser that comes here. What am I going to do? But I guess what I've been lucky at all these instances is other people have believed in me when I've not. And when some people have believed in me when some have not as well.
Yeah.
And a lady at Coles, I think I might have reached out to her for a coffee. She might have been in HR. A guy, actually, I should mention him, Paul Hopkins. I had a coffee with him, and he was the HR lead for the function I was in at that time. And I still remember I had a coffee with him in one of the meeting rooms, and he said, Vidit, that feedback's potentially correct, but I don't think it's completely true. I think you've got something here that you can offer the business. Why don't we build a plan of, are there some people you can meet and you can showcase your skills and aptitude and experience to them? And then if they see value, maybe they can interview you again for a different function.
And what do you think he saw in you that made him feel that way?
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. And then I built a great relationship with him for a while after that. And we'd catch up every 3, 6, 8 weeks, or maybe 6, 8 weeks. I don't know. I think it was probably me reaching out to him. And I think one thing I've learned in life is you can respond to situations in 2 ways. One, you can go, this happened to me and I can't do anything about it. The other you can go is, I'm not going to take no as the final answer. Like a line I often talk about is a no as a pitch stop to a potential yes. Right? And if you try, it might change. But if you don't try, then no remains a no.
And there's always the third door, right? Like often, at least my perspective was when I was applying to graduate jobs and things, there was like a LinkedIn or like a online application, the CV and resume and the cover letter, that was it. And if you get rejected, it's done. But I feel like once I've spent a few years in the workforce, as you said, realize the power of relationships as well. Often like a coffee or talking to the actual person hiring is much more powerful than just your credentials on a page, because they're going to be working with the person at the end of the day, right? And when they see something in you, that can often be a lot more powerful.
Correct. And having a go and persistence, usually people respect that. I think in any part of the world. And if there's one trait I have is that, and I've learned that, is I will just attempt. And people then, I think, follow that and go, okay, that this guy's trying. And I think reaching out and asking people for advice. I might have done that with Paul as well, and just reached out and said, hey, Paul, I'm really struggling here. Got some really soul-crushing feedback and it hasn't worked out. But can you help? Can you advise me how I should approach the situation? Or are there people I should meet? And I think that's an important point, because sometimes it's easy to just be lost in our own mind and not be vulnerable with someone else. But sometimes the best thing to do in that moment where there's no other route is perhaps to be vulnerable and say, hey, you know what, Saurav, I'm really struggling. I need some help. And that person might give you one piece of insight, or might introduce you to someone, or might say, hey, I can't help you. But just the conversation of sharing your thoughts can often just taking it off your chest. So that. And then if you want, I can go into like how that led to a role.
It sounded like it worked in terms of you spent a couple of years at Coles after that.
So then I applied, actually. Then I met a bunch of people, and then I had interviews again, and I got the job. Got the grad program, which was a huge deal. That was a huge deal. And I think that confirmed to me that if I believe in myself, it can work, even if others don't believe. And I think that perhaps has allowed me to start my own thing circumstantially, by the way. I can talk about that. It's a long story short. So that led to a 9-year career in FMCG and retail.
Cool.
I never started out. I mean, maybe you had clear aspirations to get into consulting. I never had clear aspirations, and even now,
I think I still don't have clear aspirations. I think I went into consulting because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I was like, yeah, I'll spend 3 years in this kind of generalist role, figure out what I like. Came to like 3 years, I was like, I still don't really know what I want to do, but I know I want to do something for myself or something more creative. Right. And then that just led me down a different path. So yeah, I'm still figuring out what I want to do with my life, I think.
Okay, that makes two of us. But yeah, I didn't know, but I fell into FMCG and retail, and I don't know if I loved it, but I think I kept moving up. I progressed in that industry quite quickly. So I was at Coles for 3 years, then I went to a startup. Which was a huge transition, and that's like a conversation of its own, is going from one of the biggest companies in the country to working out of a house, and a privately funded company, in a leadership role, with a lot of autonomy and a lot of expectations, and learned a lot. But I think I was probably naive in that role where I felt I needed a brand behind me and I needed mentors and support. But I think today, if I could do it again, I would spend more time in that startup because the learnings I had were incredible. I learned so much in that startup, and I was given so much rope and so much like when you get a blank page and you've got to build out a plan. This is well before AI, when you couldn't ask AI, you got to actually sit down and do it.
Use your brain.
That was incredible learning. And I joined when that business was doing about $4 million in revenue.
Cool.
And I was their commercial leader, and we scaled that to about $45 million in 12 months, which in FMCG and retail is a lot. In software, that can seem like maybe a nice to have, but in a retail context, that's
and what was the startup, if you don't mind me asking?
It was so the founder of that company was essentially an investor, and he had multiple product lines, and so it was essentially health foods. So kombuchas, we were one of the first players to launch kombuchas in retail in Australia. Yogurts, juices, muesli bars, and had a manufacturing plant in Melbourne. So that again was a great learning experience. Like you see that in consulting, where a lot of big firms are brought in to find efficiencies in operational complexities and supply chains and manufacturing. So to get exposure to that was really interesting, and I was junior in my career, right? And I'm working with all these senior folks and investors and board directors, and great learning experience. But I felt I needed to go into maybe a more structured environment, which definitely was the wrong thing now when I look back.
Interesting.
And so then I applied for roles, and I got into Procter & Gamble. And so again, went into one of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, it's like big to small, back to big.
But 10 times Coles, right? Because global company and known globally for process and structure. And that was a role in their brand team.
Cool.
And brand in FMCG and retail is really interesting because brand owns the P&L, the profit and loss.
Okay.
And the sales teams and the commercial go-to-market teams and the product teams actually it's product. Like brand is viewed essentially as like you're the product manager. So for brand like Gillette or Colgate or Pantene or Oral-B. So I was in the Gillette business.
Best a man can get.
and again, Gillette is a very commercial business because, again, without going to the intricacy, shaving as a category is not something people just buy impulsively. There's a lot of price mechanisms, a very premium category. So I did that. And then that was the role when I first got more exposure to Sydney. I traveled to Sydney a lot. So actually for a 6-month period, I was traveling between Sydney and Melbourne every week.
Cool.
I'd spend 1 week in Melbourne, 1 week in Sydney, because a lot of their strategy teams were in Sydney, and then the go-to-market teams for some of the customers were in Melbourne. And then I think I learned through that role that I am more of a builder. I'm more of an entrepreneur. I like being in challenging high-performance environments, but I like autonomy and I like agency. I think agency has been a big learning in my career. So I think it was a realization that, you know what, environment like P&G, and then they were going through some structural changes. So the best move was, hey, you know what, let's move on. And I decided to move to Sydney on my own.
Nice.
So finished up in that role. And so this is now fast forwarding to late 2019. We've compressed many years into a short period. So this wasn't like in a 2-year period from Coles to P&G. And September 2019, and I say that because COVID hit in February 2020, February, March 2020, moved to Sydney, went back into startup land, lost 2 jobs back to back.
Yeah, wow.
Unfortunately,
it was a hard time economically.
Incredibly hard. And exactly at that point, there's a lot of uncertainty. Fundraising slowed down. Companies thought they'd have to be lean.
Yeah.
So I was in a new city, relatively new city, even though it's in Australia, it was new in terms of the new environment. Didn't really know anyone in Sydney. And lost 2 jobs within a 8-week period in that period. And then COVID hit and lockdown and sort of going, do I go back to Melbourne or do I stay? I decided to stay. I've come to Sydney because I want to expand myself. And the thinking was, okay, let's do Sydney. And then maybe that's a springboard to moving overseas. But I decided to stay in Sydney, even though now I travel a lot and kind of feel like I get to experience that international life that I wanted in some capacity. And that's when I started the podcast in 2020 as the High Flyers podcast, as just a way of being productive with my life, having an identity. And I think, again, the through line has been I'd really nurtured some good relationships and invested in them. So the early guests were people I'd known. The first 8, 9, I guess the similar approach that you're taking, right? Which were people I'd known, and I reached out, and they were across different industries, people in sport, people in healthcare, people in corporate, people in other fields. And then they introduced me to people, and next thing I knew, that's how I started.
And what was the rationale behind gravitating towards a podcast versus, say, any other sort of medium of media, or, say, starting your own small business or a services company? What kind of drew you to the podcast as the place to start?
I didn't have a problem I deeply cared about to start a services business or go out and get funding or go down that approach. I think hopefully one thing that's come across is like, try and be intentional about where I spend my time. And I think the other thing I've learned is if I'm not committed, I won't do it.
Yeah, fair enough.
So the podcast felt like there was enough there in terms of curiosity and interest, but maybe there was an element of, okay, that will lead me into something next. And it actually did. I was doing a job alongside that I did for 18 months. So I was doing the podcast on the weekends and evenings. I think it's important to say I didn't go all in on it from the start.
Sure.
It was something, and I always loved it. I think from day dot. So that wasn't the confirmation point I was looking for. The confirmation point I was looking for is
this fun?
Is this fun? And I don't know if I ever thought about, can this lead to anything?
Yeah.
Like, I think the dots have connected in hindsight now. And that I think is a famous Steve Jobs quote as well, that looking forward, they never connect, but in hindsight, it's like, that seems like a natural progression. Now looking 6 years later. And then the people that I was in the job, they knew what I was doing because I was on LinkedIn and I posted about it. And I think it was probably for the first time I felt like maybe this is my calling.
Nice.
I think even though I had a relatively successful career in corporate and startups before that in various ways, it didn't feel like I wasn't thinking about it all the time. It was a job. Whereas with the podcast, for the first time, I was always thinking about it. Who am I going to interview? What am I going to talk about?
And what do you think specifically about it made it feel like a calling? Was it purely because it was your own thing that you owned, or was there something specific about this podcast medium that you thought, hey, this is what I'm really good at and I really want to do?
So one thing I've always been curious about what makes someone tick. Like, why is Saurav the way he is? Is it his childhood? Is it nature versus nurture? And then we interview people that have had success but they're still relatable. The term relatable role model is really important. So we're like, okay, how did they get to where they are? So that curiosity had always been there. Like, I used to do catch-ups privately for years where I'd ask that question and I'd really try and understand it. I think the podcast was just a public representation of that, where I now had other people listening to my conversations with someone else. But it was, and I think there wasn't a whole lot of thought behind it. Like, there was obviously the conversation was very intentional. I was very intentional about the guests, and the structure has still been the same from day dot. The structure broadly has not changed, but I didn't put any pressure on myself that I need to make it, or I need this to go somewhere, or I didn't even put a pressure on how many people are listening to it or downloads. And I think maybe that helped in the early days, that freeness of it. Was now when I look at it 6 years later, now we've got a lot more things we think about, and that's one of the products in the business. So I think that probably helped. Is I just did it because I wanted to, and that freeness was there, and it was probably a hobby. And a learning opportunity where I went, what a privilege to meet all these people. Like, and I've kept it agnostic by choice in terms of industry, geography, ethnicity. And it was like, I'm meeting all these people and learning all these things.
I'm a big believer in following your energy and what gives you or charges your batteries. I think a lot of traditional corporate jobs, they can be right for the right kind of person, but then the more entrepreneurial or curious type of person might not find them as enjoyable. And then the other quote that you reminded me of now is, you can't compete with someone who's having fun. So it sounds like you were just following your energy, going down the path that inspired you, and that kind of built or like compounded over time.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
I'd love to dig into the interview side of things more and how that craft of interviewing has developed over time. And you touched on this. You interview a wide variety of guests, so whether it be CEOs, athletes, politicians. Or how do you think about the types of people you want to reach out to and filter that down to a short list?
Definitely more art than science. And early on, it was people I knew. And then I think, again, the work speaks for itself. I think that is critical. And if someone has a great experience in that conversation, they might be open to introducing you to someone else. So they might say, have you thought about this person? So that started opening doors, referrals. I have always reached out to people. I still do it. Cold email people. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I think maybe there was a bit of that in the early days, like a bit of cold emailing. Maybe there was some inbound from people that I knew, perhaps. Like, again, people that are not, you wouldn't call them famous or public figures, but people that maybe followed my work or saw it pop up on their feed and went, hey, this sounds really interesting. Do you want to chat? And then I can't pinpoint a period where, the question I often get asked is, when did you know this is working? I don't think there was ever a point I knew was working. I guess when I went into it full-time and started Curiosity Center, we can chat on that. Again, that was a journey in itself. But if I talk about present day, I guess it's a little bit easier today because we've got 6 years of a body of work and we've done 250 plus episodes as of now, so people can listen to it. I think I said at the start, the parasocial relationship. People can get a pretty good understanding of me and the approach I take, and they can reference me and they can reach out to guests and other people we work with. So that helps. We're quite strict on people I interview. So one principle I have, and I hope I can keep it intact forever, is I need to be curious about that person. Because if I'm not curious, I'm doing a disservice to the guest, to myself, and to the listeners. Because people can see through that. I think today we get a lot of opportunities where folks will approach us and they've got an incentive to come on the show because they're wanting to promote something or announce something, but they might be in a space or they might have a story that I'm unfortunately not curious about. We try not to fall into that trap. And then I think the other one is not getting just attracted by the title. So again, as you know, the High Flyer, even the name, the High Flyers podcast, is on the premise of, okay, why does society base a high flyer in job title, not on their humanity and impact? So I think it needs to be, for us, it's the three together. Like, yes, title is important because everyone has an interesting story and everyone has some level of impact. But and then their inflection points, and are they willing to be vulnerable? Because mine's a kind of a biography, and people call it a psychology session or a therapy session, and it's quite vulnerable. And then, so I think it's a combination of referrals, inbound, outbound, but definitely led by curiosity first.
And what does spark curiosity in a guest story? Is there a particular, arc of someone's life that you look at and think, oh, this is a really interesting story and I want to hear more about it? Or is it not that easy to generalize?
That depends. I think it depends. I think it depends on what they've put out there. I think there's two perspectives. I think one is, if I know them, I might have a clearer view on that. But if I don't know them, I'm basing it on perceptions based on what I read or hear or watch online. And people might portray themselves in a certain way. So I think sometimes it's just following their journey for a bit of time
Sure.
and seeing what they're up to. I think one of the things I do is if I'm wanting to reach out to, or if I've been introduced to someone who's had a lot of impact and success, is I will try and find interviews they've done early in their journey, because they
Compared
might
to
be
today.
because they might say things that perhaps they might not share today. And I think again the dots connect in hindsight, and that's true with everyone, where it's like when they were starting out, or maybe they didn't have like a polished presentation, what did they say? Did that attract me?
Sure.
I think that's one. Two is we really care about people who don't do many interviews. And why is that? I think one, it's a great test of the podcast credibility and frankly my credibility. Two, we've got to make it worth their time. Like there needs to be a clear, compelling reason for them to come out of their shell and speak. They need to be comfortable. And three, it challenges me and my team to do the work on research, because there's probably not a lot out there. Those are my favorite interviews, and we're really proud that we achieve that quite frequently. And a lot of people come on either for their first ever interview publicly, or their first in-depth interview about their personal story. And I think that's where the last point, Saurav, is a lot of people have done interviews about their work identity.
Sure.
That's something I've really enjoyed over 6 years, and I hopefully can keep doing it. Is a common testimonial from our listeners is, hey, I've known Saurav for 10 years, but you've told me things about Saurav on your conversation that I had no idea about, and I thought I knew him really well. That means the world. Like that is the most meaningful feedback we can get.
And how do you think you get to that stage where an interviewee is comfortable sharing that? Is it a function of the deeper research you do, so you ask quite targeted questions, or is it something else, some other secret sauce that you have?
I think it's just being me.
Yeah.
And this has been a really interesting learning for me, where people say that, hey, Vidit, you make us comfortable. And I don't know what it is. Like I've never sat and I thought about it. And I think maybe that's what works. To the point earlier about when I started the podcast, is just one, don't put too much pressure on yourself, but two, be yourself. Like, you know, that line where someone says, oh, I feel like I know them, but when I meet them, they're a different person. Because they have a certain portrayal online and then a certain portrayal in person. I hope people say with me, that what they hear on the podcast or all the other stuff I do is the same as if they meet me one-on-one.
For what it's worth, I think that's definitely the case. I think I listened to a bunch of your episodes in preparation for this, and then the voice I heard and the personality that I heard in my earbuds is exactly the same as I'm
that's important to me. But it's been that it's as simple as that. It's just being myself. And I think the guest tends to connect to that energy.
Nice. And you've said that the purpose of the show is to redefine the concept of a high flyer. How has that definition of a high flyer evolved for you in these last 6 years when you've talked to so many people about it?
There's a few ways I can answer that. I think one, unfortunately, society still gives credit based on job titles. I think that is true.
It's kind of a quick heuristic to assess someone and what they've done so far.
True. And I think that even the term high flyer, I think, has perceptions attached where, again, if you look during COVID, the people that were the high flyers and should have got the recognition were not corporate CEOs. They were nurses and doctors and grocery night fill workers and Uber drivers and Uber Eats delivery drivers, right? But you wouldn't consider them high flyers. Unfortunately, I think one of the challenges for us, and we try and keep this core to our business, is it's easy to just interview people that have the big job titles, but actually it's interesting to interview people that have had an interesting story, but have interesting impact. But then the question always is, okay, will the listeners find that interesting? I think to my point earlier, the evolution now is it's not just my curiosity. It's also the listener's curiosity. And then we have expectations with sponsors and partners. We still have complete editorial ownership and we're fully independent. But that plays into it to some extent. But I think that one of my unknowns early on was, would everyone, the guests, connect with the term the High Flyers podcast? And I think now that people know what the show is about, and because there's a body of work, that's something I'm proud of, is no one has challenged that, going, hey, we won't come on your show because we don't want to be classified as a
Yeah.
high flyer. I think they understand the human definition of that and are comfortable with
Yeah,
that.
because I think in a vacuum, when you hear that name, it can sound like, a hustle bro podcast of, how to grind your way to $1 million
Yeah.
or whatever. But then when you actually hear the stories and the way you interview, it's actually almost the opposite of that, which is nice to hear.
Yeah.
I'd love to dig into now the Curiosity Center side of things as well. So it sounds like you started the podcast as its own thing, but then over time you built the Curiosity Center alongside that. For listeners, can you just tell us what the Curiosity Center does and how it sits alongside your podcast?
So the podcast is one of the products under Curiosity Center. So the Curiosity Center is the parent company that I lead. So back in so I started the podcast in 2020, as I mentioned. I think we're actually 6 years now. We started it in April, May 2020.
Amazing.
Which is incredible. Like I would never have thought that would be 6 years in when I started it, like for sure. So I mentioned I was in a job during that time, and then I came up to end of 21 and I felt, okay, is there an opportunity to build a podcast into something more meaningful and also go into it full time?
Sure.
So I decided to leave my job and go in full time, and that's when I started the Curiosity Center. Started Curiosity Center as a business, so I've been doing it full time since December 21.
Cool.
And it was on the thesis of, I guess, a center for my own curiosity. I think selfishly, an online center or an in-person center for my own curiosity. And initially, we reached out to a lot of universities, and the opportunity that I saw was, okay, I'm meeting all these interesting people on the podcast and getting to share their stories with the world. I don't think the people in that are university students, we talked about this a bit earlier, they perhaps don't know what they want to do with their lives when they're graduating university. That could be an interesting marriage of, hey, these are high performers. I will bring them into a university environment and unpack their lives and their careers and their decision making. But then because of COVID and the university environment went through a lot of change during that time, we actually did a few workshops with a bunch of the universities in different cities in Australia.
I think that might have been how we first met. I think you reached out when I was at uni to see if we could organize a sort of workshop.
That's right. And that's how I think I was doing a bit of mentoring with Textbook Ventures. So exactly. So that's how the university thing started. And then I guess I realized, back to I mentioned agency and ownership, I went, actually, we can just go direct. Why do we need a intermediary along the way? And then I think it was again just, okay, I can help people learn about industries and insights. And I think insight, intelligence, access has always been at the core of what we do. I think over time that has matured and become clearer. So today we do two things. We help companies grow and we help leaders make better decisions. We're active in Australia, New Zealand, the US, and India. Those are our 4 markets, and we are active in the industries of technology, investment, enterprise, government, and sport. Again, that has come over time. I think initially there probably was very agnostic, and then it became very tech focused. When you and I met in 21, and then I went into the VC ecosystem and did a few consulting gigs with a few VCs, and for a bit considered going into VC full time. And actually, that didn't work out. I tried, and for various reasons, it didn't quite work. But I did a bunch of consulting opportunities. And I guess, again, just putting myself out there has probably built trust. I think just showing up literally every week for the last 6 years on the podcast and then other stuff. And then we started building a really strong network and a community that a lot of companies wanted access to, which became really interesting. And that was something I never expected. So as an example, we work very closely with Google. They want access to, okay, who are the best and the fastest growing scale-ups, right? That are that Series A point. And a lot of them were engaging with our work, with the podcast. They were either guests on the show, they were listeners of the show, or they'd reach out to me and say, hey, Vidit, we're looking to fundraise. You've met all these investors. Can you give us some advice? What are the pros and cons? So I became a kind of independent whisperer in a way, but again, doing it in a very collaborative, trust, confidential manner, and just really enjoyed that. And so today we've got 5 products. The podcast, which to your point earlier is the most public facing product, and that's by design. And then the rest of the business, I guess we don't need to shout about it, which is why like people know the podcast. So podcast, I've done 250 plus episodes. Wow. That's got a really strong reach. I think it's now reaching 600,000-700,000 listeners every 10-12 weeks.
Yeah, wow.
In Australia, New Zealand, US, Southeast Asia, those are our markets. We do events. So the model that we have found that's worked and hopefully continues working is access, engagement, activation, connection. So podcast, as you know, is awareness and access. Podcast, as you know, is a really strong awareness channel. One-to-many, trust building, association, always accessible, always on. Events for us is a chance for engagement in a very tactical manner. So most of our events tend to be private events, invite only, for very specific audiences. So if we're doing a startup one, maybe it's focused on Series B founders on a very specific topic. If it's enterprise CEOs of the ASX 20 companies and getting them in a room and we engage with them really closely. Getting government leaders in the room, and then geography. We do that in the US very frequently. We're now doing that in India with the government work we're doing, and of course Australia, New Zealand. Data and insights. So I was mentioning earlier, we recently launched our latest edition of the Playbooks report. So we do multiple editions of those every year, and that actually came out from the people I was meeting. I was getting a lot of insights and a really good inside view of companies, company building, the challenges, the opportunities, both for startups, but then also for big corporates. And so a couple of opportunities that we saw was, one, the cross-pollination of the small up-and-coming companies and the big multinationals. And I think that's a key differentiation for us. And I think also it's back to signal over noise. As you know, the corporate enterprise world, you've got to really be clear on why it's beneficial, because they don't have the same incentives a startup might have to build their brand, and they don't need to build their brand or meet people. They often have access to all these people on speed dial. So if we want to add value and work with them, we've got to really provide something they can't get access to today. So data and insights is reports, it's insights, it's benchmarking. We've got our own private software product as well, a dashboard. Then we've got a small advisory business, and then the investment syndicate, which doesn't sit under Curiosity Center, that's independent of Curiosity Center, called FP10X, which is First Believers times 10. So we're First Believers, and it's me and 5 other senior execs, and we met through an angel investor education program we did in 2022 and started that. And again, that was formed out of, I'm meeting all these incredible founders and I'm helping them in so many ways. Why don't we start investing in these companies in a small way and actually show that, hey, we can support you through in many ways, including dollars. And we've done 16 investments to date, which is really cool. And then we work with a lot of companies. So our clients and our commercial partners include the Australian government, include Google, include Macquarie Capital, include Allen's, include OpenAI, include numerous companies that we don't shout about because I think the work speaks for itself and we care about the work. Like even doing something like this, for me, you and I had a bunch of chats. My thought was, do I need to? Do I need to, and do I want to do it? And I think that's an interesting conversation I often have with myself is because of the podcast, which is very public facing, my personality actually is not that. My personality is to just keep to myself and put my head down and do the work. So there's an interesting paradox there.
And so it sounds like there's, quite a few arms of the business, and not always, it's quite different in some ways in terms of the type of thinking you have to do or the type of marketing you have to do. How did that process come about of building all these arms? Was it over time you saw, hey, this is a cool opportunity, I'm going to go after this? And how do you think about managing your time across all these things?
I mean, time management is I don't think I'm going to solve that.
Ever-growing beast,
I think I love what I do. One of the drawbacks when you love what you do is you're always doing it.
Yeah.
And that's something I think most founders will say.
Yeah.
I enjoy variety.
Nice.
Like I thrive in variety. I think even my career that I mentioned earlier, when I was in jobs, hopefully that came across, that I'd move from industries, move roles, joined in different verticals. So that I've always enjoyed. And I think that gave me the confidence that I have done that in jobs for almost a decade. So I can do that in my business.
Sure.
The verticals, when I say it, and the products when I say it, seem like they're very different, but they actually interconnect really well in numerous ways, and they all flywheel together, which is why the new opportunities are formed over time through performance and through execution. Was it done consciously? Yes, to an extent, but also it wasn't all at once. I think like it seems like that today, that it was all at once, but like I've been at this 6 years. I've been at this full time for almost 5 years now. And in the early days, no way, Saurav. Like in the early days, I didn't know this was going to go anywhere. And people that are close to me know that. Like I've got a small, tight-knit group of friends, and my partner, Joe, and parents and all that. And they know this was a grind in the early days,
and
right?
I seen a lot of self-doubt as well in that stage, right? What was the kind of mindset?
Absolutely. And I guess maybe because I mentioned progressed in my career, I had a bit of I think what gave me confidence to go into this full-time is a bit of a savings net. I think that is not talked about as much. Like I think I had a 12 months runway of savings. So I went, you know what, I'll try for 12 months. And if it doesn't work out, if I didn't go back and get a job, I will. And
I think
I'll make something work.
I did a very similar thing. So I left my consulting job end of last year to try and do something on my own. I wasn't exactly sure what that was going to be, but having the safety net of, up to close to a year of runway gave me the kind of psychological safety to be like, hey, if it doesn't work out, it's not that big a deal. I can always go back and find another job. But I think without that psychological safety, it would have been hard to take risks or make less conventional bets.
And I also think it's not bad to do it on the side. I think there's a convention perhaps that, okay, you need to go all into something. True. I think actually putting your eggs in one basket is not always the right approach, because the financial side of life is not talked about. Like you've got to pay your bills, and you might have a family, or you might have people to look after. So I think that's something I don't take that lightly. But I think chasing opportunities, being at the cutting edge of innovation, I think doing things that others are not doing, I think that is critical. I think you asked me something earlier about the podcast, and I said, just be myself. I think again here, like we'd rather be original than be a 50% replica of another company. But I think that was also hard in the early days, because comparisons and a fear of missing out is a natural feeling that I think all of us have. I think that's been a great learning as I get more into the business, and even just as a human on this planet, get older, is like a metaphor I think a lot about is the swimming metaphor. Every time when I am swimming and I am in my lane and I do the strokes and then look up like 1, 2, 3 in a freestyle motion, I tend to finish the race and do relatively well. Every time I'm like looking left and right and going, are my competitors or my peers swimming faster than me, I lose the race and I drown, or I like stop and I have to restart. And I think that's been a great learning, but that took years to learn. That is, do your thing. And I think as we continue to scale our presence in enterprise and government and other markets as well, that industry is not about what everyone else is doing, because the other people that are doing it are not shouting from the rooftops. I think that's a very startup approach, and it's a feature and a bug about a lot of marketing and a lot of information. So I think that's probably helped, is having a business that plays across those verticals. But then they want to learn what we're seeing in the other industries, right? So I think that's what's allowed for these product verticals that have appeared.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. And where would you like Curiosity Center and the pod as part of that to be in, say, 5 years?
I don't know where it's going to be in a month's time. So sort of like with AI, the way it's going, and with I think the way the world's evolving, I I don't know what's,
Yeah.
and I think that's, again, maybe if I'd asked myself that question even when I started,
Yeah.
it probably would have been a crutch that would have worried me.
Unnecessary constraints.
And I think, like, people always ask me, what have I learned from doing this for so many years, meeting so many people, so many companies, so many industries, is probably that, where no one had a clear set plan ever. Truthfully, no one. Like, and I've met some really interesting people and some big company CEOs and founders and board directors and the like, and politicians. No one had a clear set path.
Yeah.
They knew some things they were curious about. They looked for some signals. They looked within if they enjoyed it. And I think that line, like, maybe you and I have talked about it, like, people will say luck. Like, I've actually gone down and researched luck, and the best definition I've found is luck equals preparation meets opportunity. Right?
He was a baseball coach who said that at one point.
I don't actually know who said that, but that, probably. That I think is true in this context, is if we just keep doing good work and keep performing and delivering what our different stakeholders want across our different things, and then the right place, right time, hopefully we will keep growing as a business and evolving. But who knows? We'll see where it goes. But yeah, I've never been someone who gets too caught up in that. And I think a lot of my friends and family struggle with that, because they ask me this question a lot. And
like, what's the plan? Where are you going? But
I don't know.
I think a way of conceptualizing it that I resonate with is the surface area of luck, where you want to put yourself out there as much as possible to increase the chances of getting lucky, because certain things you do won't work out, certain things will, and you just don't know which one of those things is going to pay off. It's just about, putting yourself out there as much as possible and then increasing that area of luck to allow it to strike more often. It's kind of like collecting rainwater. You want a bucket that's huge versus like a small cup, is a metaphor that I've always resonated with.
And it can also be a balance. I think for us, it's a balance now where, yes, surface area, but also being clear on the surface area and doubling down on that surface area. So the work we do, continuing to be the best at it, or one of the best at it, rather than getting distracted by the new all the time. And I think there's a risk, and I've seen this, like, even in the insights, data and insights work we do, the best companies are very, over time, like, I think initially, to your point, you start out broad, but then they niche down and narrow down on what they're really good at. And are they delivering value to the customer and actually growing, rather than trying to be like that. What's that line? Be, if you're trying to be everything to everyone, you end up becoming nothing to no one. And that's something I think about. So I think you're right, but it's a balancing act for us. Is, yes, the surface area, but then double down on the things we're doing and continue to refine and iterate.
Cool. Well, we like to end each episode of Nonlinear with 3 quick fire questions. The first one is, what is one book you think should be mandatory reading at school?
So one book that it was given to me by one of my early mentors, was a book called I think it's called The First 90 Days. And it's a book about the first 90 days in a job, what you should do. And I think it's targeted at more of a middle manager, senior leader audience, but I read it when I was quite early in my career, and I haven't read that recently because I've not done any job in the last 6 years, but
made your own job,
but like that I think taught me a lot, and and I also think that is an interesting period, because that's one of the questions I like asking other people, and I think about myself as the first 90 days matter a lot in any context, in a job, or if you're moving cities, or you're starting a new relationship, or what have you. So that's a book that I think it's still relevant, and there might be a couple of new editions that have come out now.
Cool. I'll check that one out.
Yeah.
The second question is, what's one purchase under $100 that's materially improved your life?
I'm a pretty simple guy. I mean, Apple AirPods, which are, I don't know if they're under $100 and maybe a bit more. They've been great. Like, I use them
for a podcast market as well.
I use them all the time. But even when I'm walking on a call or at the gym, I mean, one thing that I've been using, and this is a plug to 8 Sleep. They were kind enough to give me the 8 Sleep pod to test out at home. That's significantly over $100, but that's been great. Like, to know my sleep, and you can warm the bed. That's been a really good one.
Cool.
So those are probably 2.
And last question is, what's one compliment you've never forgotten?
compliment someone's given me.
Compliment someone's given you.
I think the one that comes up, I mean, even this morning someone said it, is like, you'll just keep trying. You won't stop till you get there. Whether it's me doing a project and finishing it, or we're doing a piece of work with a customer, or me trying to get a podcast guest, and some guests take 4 years and eventually getting a hold of them. So I think manifesting things, that doesn't always come true, but I think manifesting it and being okay with no, it's probably something I've gotten fairly good at, I guess.
I think that's the theme that's come out across this conversation, you know, when you were at Coles, didn't get in, found another door in, when you started your business and you pivoted a couple of times as well, and just constantly learning and iterating. I think that's come throughout this conversation.
I think I just know now sort of the default answer is going to be no. I think the world has told me enough times that Vidit's not going to do this. I'm like, I know that's my starting point. Sure. So I'm going to have to work 2 times as hard as anyone else. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, Vidit, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much for being generous with your time today. It's been great to hear about your story.
Thank you for having me, and congrats on starting this. I'm excited to see where this goes. I'm excited to listen to episode 200 and compare it back to this episode.
Let's see how it goes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Saurabh.